I have been studying hypnosis since I was a teenager in the mid-1990s. I started working in private practice as a hypnotherapist in 2001 and have been teaching hypnosis since 2004, running my own GHSC accredited hypnotherapy practitioner diploma from 2007 to 2019. I have a number of online hypnosis and therapy training courses, and I'm currently in the process of writing a series of hypnotherapy books called Hypnotherapy Revealed. The first book is an introduction to hypnotherapy. Second book is about the Ericksonian approach, which this lecture is based on, and the third book is a comprehensive book of hypnotherapy scripts. My main interest in the field of hypnotherapy has been in the work and contributions of the psychiatrist Milton Erickson. By the end of this presentation, you'll know what I feel the Ericksonian approach is and is not. You'll understand the fundamental principles of the Ericksonian approach, revealing the simplicity which underlies its apparent complexity, and how you can use the Ericksonian approach within your work. The Ericksonian approach was named after the psychiatrist Milton H. Erickson, who lived from 1901 to 1980. The term Ericksonian is thought to have been first used by Jeff Zeig in a presentation in 1977 to refer to the approach Milton Erickson took to therapy. It was later used in 1980 for the first Ericksonian Congress. Now the term Ericksonian is used frequently as a label for the hypnotic approach taught on many courses, often linked to neurolinguistic programming courses. I've often wondered how Erickson would have felt having thousands of therapists out there claiming to do his approach when he never wrote down what an Ericksonian approach was specifically, and when many of the therapists, including myself, are lay hypnotherapists rather than medically trained practitioners, psychologists, dentists, or social workers. Different people teaching the Ericksonian approach have focused on different aspects of what they observed Erickson doing, teaching strategic approaches, indirect techniques, metaphorical approaches, language patterns, solution-focused approaches, etc., or trying to find a therapeutic model or deeper theory behind the way that Erickson worked. Often, what's taught are techniques that Erickson used, and these are then referred to as his approach. Erickson himself said, "Don't try to imitate my voice or my cadence, just discover your own, develop your own techniques, be your own natural self." The Ericksonian approach isn't techniques, indirect, permissive, conversational, hypnotic language patterns, hypnosis or therapy. It's a way of approaching the hypnosis, therapy, coaching, communication or problem solving that you're doing. Erickson would expect those learning his way of approaching therapy to already be trained or undergoing an academic degree as a therapist, dentist, medical practitioner or social worker. Learning the Ericksonian approach doesn't teach a therapeutic approach, like if someone were to learn cognitive behavioural therapy or training to be a clinical psychologist or any other form of therapy. It doesn't teach the social worker how to do social work, or the dentist how to be a dentist. A Jungian analyst could start doing their therapy through the principles of the Ericksonian approach, as could a solution-focused therapist or a cognitive behavioural therapist, or any other therapist. This way you can see many different therapists doing very different therapy, but all using an Ericksonian approach, and all may say that they use an Ericksonian approach. I did a job where I had to work in a psychodynamic way, so while I was in that job, I took my usual Ericksonian approach attitude. All documents I had to fill out were completed as per the approach I was using. Anyone watching me work would see that I was using a psychodynamic approach to my therapeutic work, and my descriptions to managers, clinical supervisors and colleagues were done using the language of the psychodynamic approach. But underlying it all the time was the Ericksonian approach in how I would present the work I did to the clients. I would often be described by colleagues, managers and clinical supervisors as being so creative, and often asked how I managed to get so-and-so to do this or that, and how I thought of this as a way to help the client move forward. I used to describe that I was being Ericksonian. I think of it as something you make a part of who you are rather than something you do. I wasn't doing an Ericksonian approach, I was being Ericksonian. A few years later, I was doing a role which required me to do a very different therapeutic approach. I had to use a solution-focused approach with clients I worked with. I generally prefer using a solution-focused approach compared to a psychodynamic approach, but used purely, and as it is often taught, and so many of the staff around me would use it, can still be restrictive and not as client-centred as I would like. So I used a solution-focused approach to my therapeutic work, but underlying this was the Ericksonian approach. Due to my outcomes, I was asked to be involved in regular staff training for my employers and others in the same sector to help teach the solution-focused approach, as I do it, to these other staff, and was regularly asked to do staff trainings for staff of other similar services to help them to use the approach and to help their staff feel comfortable with the idea of having to start adopting this approach into their work. This is what I hope to help you see here, that whatever therapeutic orientation you have, it will come with a set structure and way of thinking about things, which may have validity in some contexts but may be restricted in others. And becoming client-centered through the development of the Ericksonian approach will help you to expand your hypnosis or therapeutic skills by not focusing on it as a therapy or a form of hypnosis, but as a way of approaching the therapy or hypnosis that you already do. Some popular and common descriptions of an Ericksonian approach include Ericksonian hypnotherapy, or indirect metaphorical hypnosis, is the term used to describe a very specific type of hypnosis which is hallmarked by the use of indirect suggestion, metaphor and storytelling, as opposed to the direct type of suggestion that was its predecessor. This description is from Natural Hypnosis, from their post, What is Ericksonian Hypnosis and What Characterises It? And Ericksonian hypnosis is a method of indirect hypnosis named after Dr. Milton Erickson, which is a description from the British Hypnosis Research post, What is Ericksonian Hypnosis? Definition and History. These two descriptions are typical of the type of descriptions you find when you try to find out what the Ericksonian approach is. They focus on promoting the idea of various techniques and approaches often classed as indirect techniques, while downplaying direct techniques and approaches. These sites go on to give fuller explanations about Erickson's work and contributions about different techniques he employed, and differentiating between Erickson's approach, where he would often use an indirect, permissive and conversational approach, versus what has become termed traditional hypnotherapy, which is usually more direct and formulaic, often using generic scripts and about the hypnotist doing something to a client rather than evoking something from within a client. Obviously this is a generalisation, and there are times an Ericksonian hypnotherapist will be direct and times a traditional hypnotherapist will be more permissive. Although I agree that Erickson frequently used indirect techniques and language patterns and said that he preferred this over telling people what to do and found this way of working preferable to giving direct suggestions for change, I disagree with these descriptions as a description for what the Ericksonian approach is. I feel that they're cherry-picking aspects of what Erickson did and focusing on some of his contributions to therapeutic change work, rather than looking at how he actually worked and what he said about his approach to therapy. There is also the issue that a greater number of subjects are more resistant towards the hypnotist when indirect suggestions are used, although they usually feel more hypnotised. So a greater focus on teaching indirect hypnosis language patterns as the main way that the therapist will communicate with the client could lead to the client being more resistant when the reason the therapist is apparently using indirect techniques is to reduce or circumvent that resistance. Indirect suggestion is no more effective than direct suggestion. Clients aren't more likely to follow indirect suggestions compared to direct suggestions. The Erickson Foundation defines Ericksonian therapy as an experiential, phenomenologically based approach to problem solving that utilises existing client attributes while evoking natural processes of learning and adaptation. An Ericksonian approach is fundamentally about being client-centred rather than therapist-centred. You draw upon your skills and knowledge as a therapist, but you fit your approach to the individual client rather than trying to fit the client to your approach. This inherently leads to generally communicating in a more permissive and indirect way, because you are focusing on helping the client to do their own work rather than telling the client to do what you want them to do. It doesn't mean that you never tell a client what you would like them to do. It just means that whatever you say and do would be client-centred, not therapist-centred. You are eliciting and inviting responses from a client and supporting the client on their therapeutic journey and dictating to them what they must do. This way of communicating is naturally more permissive and indirect. The ideas I'm presenting here aren't new. In Ericksonian Hypnosis, a review of the empirical data, it was felt that the Ericksonian approach wasn't the language patterns or ideas Erickson held about hypnosis or hypnotizability, but about having the ability to increase client expectancy, motivation, and belief that therapeutic change can and will occur. The article gives an example of a story Erickson told about his 3-year-old son Robert falling over and requiring stitches, and the intervention which helped Robert through the situation. Erickson directed Robert's attention to the pain and acknowledged the pain Robert was experiencing. He then directed his attention to the colour of the blood and to counting how many stitches he received. Erickson said that the question could be asked about when hypnosis was employed, and stated that hypnosis began with the very first statement to him and became apparent when he gave his full and undivided interest and pleased attention to each of the succeeding events that constituted the medical handling of the problem. The article uses this as an example of the creative utilisation that Erickson would employ to help bring relief to people, but questioned whether this was hypnosis and that it could just have been a distraction technique, that Erickson was more interested in whether an intervention worked rather than how the intervention would be defined. This is an important point in relation to the Ericksonian approach. I wouldn't call it Ericksonian hypnosis, indirect hypnosis, or conversational hypnosis. What is important are the Ericksonian principles. It isn't about the hypnotic language or about whether you're doing hypnosis. It's about whether you are presenting therapy in a way that is right for your client in that moment, which involves applying your therapeutic professional knowledge in a client-focused way. It could easily be said that what Erickson was doing with Robert wasn't hypnosis, because if it gets classed as hypnosis, it means almost anything involving guiding and focusing attention is hypnosis. To me, if I had to give it a definition, I would say it was hypnosis. It wasn't a structured induction to find something to focus on, like that spot on the wall, for example, and to pay that thing all of your attention, like paying the spot on the wall all of your attention, and in doing so, shutting out stimuli that isn't within that focus of attention, and then moving this attention elsewhere after beginning to follow the presented ideas, like inside into thoughts or feelings when suggested. Instead, attention is focused on elements of the ongoing experience and directed from one part of the experience to another, narrowing that focus of attention away from other thoughts, feelings and external stimuli towards those aspects of the ongoing experience, and at each stage, Robert is following the presented ideas for where to focus. Erickson described hypnosis as the communication of ideas and understandings for the purpose of eliciting responsive behaviour at both psychological and physiological levels, and trance as active unconscious learning. There are some fundamental principles of the Ericksonian approach, and there is simplicity underlying the complexity often taught on courses teaching the Ericksonian approach, and seen in some Ericksonian interventions. Simplicity doesn't mean easy, or that you don't get complexity from that simplicity, or that things can't be complex. You can learn the rules for chess, which can lead to complex games. Learning the rules can be easy, yet mastering chess takes time, focused practice, and hard work. The fundamental principles of an Ericksonian approach are curious observation, utilisation, and having a goal. Out of these fundamental principles, you can get complexity because you are focusing on following the observations, utilising these observations in a client-centred way to work towards their therapeutic goal. Curious observation is where you would observe the client, not just what you see and hear, like observing the client's behaviours, how they're dressed, how they present, what body language they're using moment by moment, their responses to questions, their tone of voice and changes to their voice, etc., but also using your observations of other information, like perhaps the client's age, their role in their family, where they live, where they grew up, their interests, their responses to different subjects, their metaphors and ways of describing things, what their home, work, leisure environments are like, what meets their various innate needs, what needs are met, unmet and inappropriately met, non-conscious responses that they give, their personality and motivation, etc. You're also using observations of your professional knowledge of things like psychology, neurology, child development, family dynamics, what the evidence is in relation to treating or addressing the presenting problem. What you're observing is not just what is in front of you here and now in a session, but of what is in the past, present, outside of the session and potential future of the client and what you bring to the session environment, what happens during the session, like if there is a siren from an emergency vehicle passing by during the session, you observe this and you may perhaps utilise this observation. Utilisation is where you utilise your observations towards the desired goal. You're looking at how you can fit your therapy around the client rather than trying to fit the client around your therapy. So for example, with a client presenting with anxiety, perhaps you utilise a hobby of theirs that they find they are calm while doing, or perhaps you utilise their circle of friends, or maybe utilise that they like to analyse things, or maybe utilise their annoyance at having the problem, or their off-the-cuff description about how they feel like they can't see the wood for the trees, to set a task for them to do outside of therapy, or as a metaphor that you present to them maybe during a guided visualization in the session, or in something you say to them during the therapeutic conversation. Perhaps you utilise one or more of the successes that they've mentioned, or a specific gesture that they seem to do every time they talk about what makes them anxious. The therapist can utilise all sorts of emotions and responses, whether it is anger or resistance or a lack of motivation, or positive things like having a supportive family, being confident at playing a musical instrument, running a marathon each year, or a pleasant experience. Whatever it happens to be. A therapist can channel a client's anger towards being angry at an addiction bullying them, or their resistance to do therapeutic tasks into resistance to doing the problem behaviours, or lack of motivation to having a lack of motivation doing problem behaviours, or having a supportive family could be used to help them develop a support network to keep them on track with the therapy. Confidence, playing a musical instrument, could have the confidence transferred to being confident public speaking if the problem was lacking confidence public speaking. The tenacity and ability not to give up and to run a marathon, which means they also have the motivation to do hard work of training for a marathon and are able to do something which at times will be unpleasant and push through and keep going because they know that they want the end result. This can be channeled to help the client keep going, working hard and working towards achieving their goals. Most things that the therapist observes can be used to help the client. They'll be communicating their way that things need to be done. So a client with a problem they can't seem to overcome, but who runs marathons, has the skills. There is something about the running marathons situation which allows these skills to be present. It's just a question now of how this can be transferred so that whatever it is that they do to be motivated to run marathons can happen in relation to achieving their therapeutic goals. You'll be doing therapy that you are trained to do, but are presenting that therapy and deciding from the therapy you are trained to do what is likely the best approach for this client. Having a goal is about ideally establishing a clear and achievable goal and steps towards that goal that are within the control of the client. You're then utilising your observations in line with the goal and the steps to that goal. Erickson described what he did as accepting and utilising clients' responses, stating, "All I know is that they will respond in an appropriate fashion, in a way which best suits them as an individual, and so I become intrigued with wondering exactly how their unconscious will choose to respond, and so I comfortably await their response, knowing that when it occurs I can accept and utilise it." So, for example, you may observe that a subject is anxious and holding on to the arm of a chair, and the goal is to help them relax. So you may utilise the gripping by suggesting you can put all that tension in that grip, using permissive and vague language and focusing physical and emotional tension in one place, giving the suggestion that they can do this. And obviously, if they're doing this, then they're following along and engaging with the process and doing the right thing. Or, as you grip the arm of that chair with all of your tension, I wonder how quickly you'll relax. Using a contingent suggestion, presupposing relaxation and linking tension in the grip with relaxing, using apposition of oppositions. Or, while you grip that arm of the chair, another part of you can relax, using a contingent suggestion and apposition of oppositions, linking the gripping and tension in one location with relaxing elsewhere. Or, I don't know whether you'll discover gripping the chair leads to relaxation spreading through the rest of your body, or whether you find your mind drifts and wanders and dreams. Linking gripping with a double bind, either the gripping will lead to relaxation, or the gripping will lead to the mind wandering and drifting into a dreamlike state. Or you can grip the arm of that chair tightly and begin to relax, using a compound suggestion, or a whole range of other suggestions that are hypnotic language patterns, but the focus isn't on the language pattern. The language patterns evolve naturally from utilising the observation of the client gripping the arm of the chair towards the goal of the client being relaxed. An example of hypnotising someone using just the fundamental principles: you could have a client in your office. There could be some traffic outside. Perhaps you have a clock ticking on your wall, and so you could slowly and in a measured, relaxed way, with your focus on the client, say something like, "You can be aware of the ticking clock, of the traffic outside, of the sound of my breathing, and you can notice what those hands feel like resting on your lap while you wonder what will happen next. And before you discover what will happen next, you can notice which hand feels the heaviest and wonder whether one of those hands will lift, becoming more internally focused, and what sensations you notice in those hands. And as those sensations continue in the hands, your shoulders can begin to relax," said during a client's out-breath, "and the eyes can begin to defocus," said when you notice this happening, "and you can begin to drift into a pleasant thought or memory, and I don't know what that thought or memory will be. And as you drift deeper into that thought or memory, your eyelids can get heavier and feel more comfortable to be closed, and as those eyelids close, you can enjoy that inner experience while I continue to talk to you in the background." So you're using the client's ongoing experience of what they are aware of the reality of the situation, and directing their attention from external awareness to internal awareness, and following and utilising your observations towards the goal of having the client focused internally, relaxing and responsive. You're employing many hypnotic techniques, but you aren't doing that on purpose. You aren't deciding to use specific techniques. You're just utilising your observations and linking these to the goal. For therapy, you may utilise feelings that the client mentions. It's important to remember to feed back what they say in a way that gets them more absorbed into those feelings in the present, if that's the aim of why you're utilising the feelings. For example, if a client was talking about a time they felt good about an achievement, as you talk to them, you can begin to re-evoke those feelings in the present and begin to associate them with solving the problem. To do this, you need to feed back what they say into present tense. So the client may have said, "I completed a 10-kilometre run a few years back. I didn't think I could do it and was so pleased when I crossed the finish line." The therapist could reply asking questions about how it felt, how they knew they felt pleased, asking them to think back and absorb themselves in the memory. They can ask, "Where did the good feeling of achievement start in your body?" Then when the client replies, stating something like, "It started in my stomach," The therapist can follow this up with something like, "It starts in your stomach," while nodding slightly to imply agreement with your direct suggestion that you've just given them. Then they can pause a moment for the feeling in the present to develop further before asking something like, "And what happens next with that feeling?" This begins to have the client focusing on the feeling in the present rather than just the memory. The therapist could then use anchoring, which is a process of connecting a stimulus and a response to linking the elicited feeling with a tone of voice or a touch, or with your voice coming from a specific location, so that it can be triggered later when the client is thinking of something where that feeling would be helpful. An example of utilising the feelings from what a client has said could be, "Client, I went out for a walk in the country the other day. It was so relaxing." Therapist, "What was it you find so relaxing?" Intentionally using find instead of found. Client, "All the different colours, the cool breeze, the feelings of the warm sun on my face." The client has to become more absorbed, deepen their trance in the experience to give more detail. Therapist, "So you see all the different colours, feel that cool breeze and the warm sun on your face." Encouraging the client to become deeper absorbed in the experience they're sharing, but in the present rather than in the past. Client, "Yes." Getting agreement because all I'm saying is what I've been told. The agreement encourages further future agreement and has the client agreeing with going deeper into the experience that they're having here and now. Using these fundamental principles, you start using what has been described as hypnotic language patterns and indirect or conversational techniques, but without thinking about them or giving them labels. They're used when the time is right, rather than worrying about when and where to use them. This is how I teach hypnosis on my courses. I start with introducing students to the fundamental principles. Then I have them in pairs, with one taking on the role of hypnotist and the other taking on the role of subject. And I have them set the goal to have the subject relaxed and responsive. I do a brief demonstration of what I want the students to do, of observing the subject and utilising observations to help the subjects to be relaxed and responsive. Then I tell the students to pair up and do the same. This is often perhaps 15 to 30 minutes into the course. They haven't learned hypnosis, they haven't been taught different language patterns or techniques, they haven't been given a script to read to the subject. They're just told to sit opposite the subject and say what they observe that is relevant and can be utilised to achieve the goal of the subject being relaxed and responsive. This could be things like acknowledging when the subject breathes out and connecting this with the idea or goal of relaxing more. It could be noticing the subject's arm or hand twitches slightly and linking this with the idea of releasing any tension and relaxing deeper. It could be the eyes glazing over and watering a little, linked with the idea of wanting to close the eyes and drift deeper, relaxed. It could be linking blinking with closing the eyes and relaxing, or with the idea of the eyelids becoming heavier. Within this, they will be using various hypnotic language patterns and techniques, but they haven't been taught these yet. So the students aren't hung up on the idea of trying to remember the different techniques and language patterns and whether they're using them correctly or when to use them. Their focus is just on the subject and on using curious observation in line with the desired outcome. When they later learn the various language patterns and techniques, these just add to their knowledge, add to what they can draw upon, and help them to be more nuanced in what they do because they now know these various techniques. But they're already comfortable with doing hypnosis, and they know that they can do hypnosis without the labels for the different techniques and language patterns. They've already learned how to apply the Ericksonian approach in relation to doing hypnosis. The Ericksonian approach focus is on doing hypnosis or therapy in a client-centered way, not on trying to do various techniques. It is on being flexible in how you carry out the hypnosis or therapy, rather than taking a rigid approach where you try to fit clients to your approach. You aren't trying to do a therapy which isn't backed by evidence, but instead finding the best way of presenting the evidence-informed therapy that you do to the individual client. You aren't saying, I do Ericksonian hypnotherapy or psychotherapy, as if that's the therapy that you practice. You're doing the therapeutic approach which you have trained in. You just happen to approach that hypnosis or therapy with a client-centered perspective of curious observation, utilizing what you observe, and having clear and achievable outcomes which are within the client's control that you're working towards with those observations. Milton Erickson said that he felt his greatest contribution to the field of hypnosis and therapy was the utilization principle. I think that this is what is at the heart of the Ericksonian approach. Not all of the techniques and language patterns often attributed to the approach. I think that these evolve out of utilizing observations towards a goal. Erickson said of his approach to therapy that it was about exploring a patient's individuality to ascertain what life learnings, experiences and mental skills are available to deal with the problem, and utilising these uniquely personal internal responses to achieve therapeutic goals. And that these methods are based on the utilisation of the subject's own attitudes, thinking, feeling and behaviour and aspects of the reality situation. The therapist's task should not be proselytizing on the patient with his own beliefs and understandings. What is needed is the development of a therapeutic situation permitting the patient to use his own thinking, his own understandings, his own emotions in the way that best fits him in his scheme of life. So Erickson often spoke of an overarching perspective on approaching hypnosis and therapy rather than on specific techniques or language patterns. And when asked to say how to do hypnosis or how to do therapy, these are the kinds of answers he gave, rather than giving an answer in the form of techniques. I thought it would be helpful at this point to take a look at one of Milton Erickson's cases from the perspective of the Ericksonian approach. A teenaged schoolgirl sucked her thumb. The school psychologist told her that the thumb sucking was an aggressive behaviour. The parents wanted a religious intervention done with their daughter. Erickson declined to do this approach and told the parents they're not to tell their daughter off or give her any punishments for thumb sucking over the next month. When the girl came to her session, Erickson told the parents to leave and then told the girl that he didn't like the way that they had ordered him to cure the thumb sucking. He said, "It's your thumb and your mouth. Why in the hell can't you suck it if you want?" He then proceeded to suggest that if the thumb sucking was supposed to be aggressive, why didn't she really get aggressive? He told her to suck her thumb noisily for half an hour while her father read the paper each night, and to do the same when her mother was sewing each night, and in school to suck her thumb whenever the student and teacher who she most disliked looked at her. After the session, the girl only sucked her thumb at the times specified during the therapy session, and after a while she got bored of following the instructions and so stopped sucking her thumb. This case appears in books including Volume 1 of the collected papers of Milton H. Erickson, Uncommon Therapy and My Voice Will Go With You, and is outlined in Bill O'Hanlon's book An Uncommon Casebook, which is a great reference source for finding Erickson cases and seeing which works they're in. When people look at Erickson's cases, often a first reaction is how creative the approach or the solution developed. People will say things like, "I could never have been that creative. I wouldn't have thought to do that." I'm reminded of the Dr. Watson quote from A Scandal in Bohemia, where Watson arrives at 221B Baker Street. He hasn't seen Holmes for an extended period of time. On arrival, Holmes identifies that Watson has been out in a very muddy area a few days earlier, that he has started practicing as a medical doctor again, and that he has a servant girl who doesn't do a very good job. Watson questions how Holmes could know all of this. Holmes explains his observations, to which Watson replies, "When I hear you give your reasons, the thing always appears to me to be so ridiculously simple that I could easily do it myself, though at each successive instance of your reasoning I'm baffled until you explain your process, and yet I believe my eyes are as good as yours." Holmes replies that Watson sees but doesn't observe, and uses the example of the number of stairs up to the flat and how Watson despite walking up and down those stairs hundreds of times over the years, doesn't know how many steps there are, because he has only ever seen them, he hasn't observed them. If presented with the client profile, for example, this teenage girl sucks her thumb in school and at home. She has had input from a psychologist who feels that it's aggressive behaviour, but she's still doing this behaviour. The parents now want her to have therapy with you to see how you can help her stop this behaviour. Think for a moment about how you would respond. There are many therapists who, if asked to comment on the case and on what could be done to help, might talk about trying to uncover why this teenage girl is doing this infantile behaviour as a teenager. Some might interpret it like the psychologist in the description as being aggressive behaviour. Others might wonder if it is self-soothing behaviour, and I'm sure there would be many other interpretations. Off the back of these interpretations, perhaps one therapist might try to find out what is causing the girl to do this aggressive behaviour, and maybe talk about anger management classes or sessions being required. Another therapist might talk about teaching the girl alternative ways to relax and perhaps manage anxiety, which aren't so bothersome to others. Some therapists might focus on asking the girl what is going through her mind when she sucks her thumb and try to uncover specific thinking or beliefs which could be maintaining the problem that the girl could alter to stop her doing that behaviour. Yet another therapist might try to uncover what has got her stuck at an infantile phase of development and may look to see if there was any childhood abuse back at the time which could need uncovering and addressing. Given that the girl is having therapy because the parents want her to have the therapy, not because she's seeking the therapy herself, perhaps the therapist would question whether the girl would be motivated enough to make changes to address the problem. Maybe she doesn't care that others want her to stop doing her behaviour because the behaviour isn't a problem to her, other than the fact that others keep on focusing on it as a problem and she has to then see therapists she doesn't want to see about it. As an autistic person, I can understand this perspective of doing behaviours like self-soothing behaviours or stimming, which aren't a problem to me and don't impact on anyone else, yet others could see them as a problem and potentially want me to stop doing the behaviours because they don't like it. This can especially be the case with some autistic children and their behaviours, where their parents want the behaviour addressed and stopped, even though it isn't impacting on their lives. It isn't about any of these ideas being right or wrong, but the question is, how do you create change with this girl if she decides to change? You can look at creating an environment favourable to change, where you open up the possibility for her to change if she wants to. Whatever approach you use in your practice, you'd want to know how you can increase the girl's motivation to change, and have that motivation linked to a reason that she wants to change for, not because others want me to change. You'd want to know how you would be likely to be able to change the behaviour and create lasting change. From the perspective of the fundamental principles of an Ericksonian approach, looking at this case, you can think about how this behaviour is communicating a message, whether intended or not. The girl isn't saying she wants to change. The school or psychologist seems to want her to change this behaviour, and the parents want the girl to have therapy and possibly act like they know what is best for their daughter and what she needs and how she should behave. Other observations could be around the girl being a teenager. Erickson would also know where the girl lived, where she grew up, what socioeconomic situation she grew up in. The parents and possibly the girl herself were religious, and Erickson would know more about this. For example, whether it was a strict or restrictive religious household. Erickson would know more about the school situation, how the girl was doing in school, how she was expected to do in her schooling, any problems with other students or teachers, if there were, what those problems were, what the girl enjoyed doing, her hobbies and interests, and likely a lot of other information, both from questioning with the parents and maybe other professionals before the first session, and from personal observations, and likely some information directly from the girl during questions in the therapy session. Erickson also had his knowledge of years of working with children, teens and families, his personal experience as a father of 8 children, his experience training and practicing as a psychiatrist for many years, and all of his medical experience to draw on. One problem with just seeing the end result, like I told her to suck her thumb in front of her mum, dad and most annoying student and teacher, and she stopped sucking her thumb. Or in the case of the African Violet Queen of Milwaukee case, perhaps stating, I told her to give a flower to any family in the town that has experienced a birth, death or marriage, and the woman overcame her depression. Is that it can give Erickson's cases an air of mystery and, like they were somehow radical ideas plucked from his amazing brain, it can lead some to paraphrase Lewis Wahlberg from his foreword to Jeff Zeig's book Experiencing Erickson, to think that these cases are clever tactics rather than appreciating that they're based on dedicated training and can then lead to people trying to imitate Erickson's interventions or focusing on trying to learn the interventions without learning and gaining the kind of knowledge, skills and experience that is required to come up with these seemingly novel interventions. Erickson sharing the dramatic end result or stating a novel or unusual sounding claim can be a great teaching aid. It would grab the attention of students, piquing their curiosity, and hopefully once the story is told, they learn an intended lesson from it. That in the case of Erickson's own students would help them to look at how they apply their own therapeutic knowledge in a more client-centered way. But in other contexts, it can be unhelpful. In this case, using all of these observations, there could be many alternative ways forward, but Erickson's way forward makes sense. Even with the limited case information we have, this was a teenager with no personal motivation to change the behaviour, and likely an attitude of, why should I change when it's everyone else who has a problem with the behaviour, not her. She's being made to go to therapy and has parents seemingly knowing what is best for her. So it makes sense that Erickson would come alongside the girl by stating that he doesn't like that they are telling him he has to treat the thumb sucking. He comes alongside her by also stating that it should be up to her whether she sucks her thumb or not. She's likely going to agree with both of these points, that she also doesn't like them always telling her what to do, and she agrees that she should be allowed to make her own choice over whether she sucks her thumb or not. In hypnotic terms, this is building a yes set. It's likely to help with rapport, and it sets the stage for the girl being more likely to agree to the therapy when it is presented, because it will be presented from within this frame of the girl doing what she wants to do and not what her parents or the school or the psychologist want her to do. It's also giving her personal motivation. If she wants to stop sucking her thumb, she will. If she wants to keep sucking her thumb, she will. Following this, Erickson focuses on the psychologist's interpretation of the behaviour being aggressive. He doesn't say that they're right or wrong in their interpretation, but he uses their interpretation as a way to play into what he likely observed in the girl as a teenager. And in this situation with her stubbornly not stopping this behaviour, despite attempts to make her stop, to have her do what they want to do, the thumb sucking in an aggressive manner, and then giving her the interpretation of what this means, rather than just stating, why not leave here, sucking your thumb aggressively, and leaving it up to the girl to interpret that. He states how she can do the thumb sucking in a way that will annoy the relevant people. By focusing on almost seeming to collude with the girl, but remember that Erickson had informed the parents of this beforehand by telling them not to punish her for this behaviour over the next month, she was focused on listening and engaging with how she can annoy them with this aggressive thumb sucking, and was motivated to do this aggressive thumb sucking to annoy them. She probably felt a sense of security in doing this behaviour because the therapist told her to do it, so she couldn't get told off and take the blame for it. But as had been established, she doesn't like to be told what to do, so there has to come a point where what she's doing is a chore she's doing because someone has told her to do it, not something she's deciding to do herself, and she's likely to then decide to stop doing it. She agreed in the therapy session that she should be the one to decide whether to suck her thumb or not, but she needed to have a situation that would present itself where she can make that decision herself not to suck her thumb. According to what Erickson shared about this case, the girl apparently stopped sucking her thumb within the month and still wasn't sucking her thumb a year later. So in the context of the fundamental principles, it's clear that there was a goal of having the girl stop thumb sucking, that there was a therapist's goal of having the girl have personal motivation to stop the thumb sucking, that there were many observations around the girl, her age, her situation, her attitude and mindset, which were able to be utilised to build rapport with her and to present therapy in a client-centred way that put the girl at the heart of the therapy, that would be in line with achieving the therapeutic goals. So in this presentation we've explored what I feel the Ericksonian approach is and is not, what the fundamental principles of an Ericksonian approach are to approach hypnosis or therapy with curious observation, to utilise these observations to help progress towards the desired goal. I've shared my breakdown of one of Erickson's cases, and you can think about how you can apply this way of thinking within the context of the work that you're doing, what observations you can make in hypnosis, coaching or therapy, and different ways that you can utilise these observations towards the goals and outcomes the client is working to achieve. To end this presentation, I just wanted to give a quick demonstration of a hypnotic induction. This induction is the My Friend John induction, and it neatly demonstrates the points mentioned in this presentation about how the Ericksonian approach isn't hypnosis or therapy, but rather just a way to approach hypnosis and therapy. What you'll see in this induction demonstration is me describing to the client what I would say to someone who has asked how to go into hypnosis. I then start describing observations I notice in the client in front of me, phrasing what I say as if I'm talking about this other person, but I add emphasis to certain words and phrases while talking to indirectly or covertly convey these ideas for the client to respond to. This induction is based on being client responsive, on observing the client while I'm communicating and utilising the client's responses in real time to quickly guide them into hypnosis. The advantage of this type of approach is that it doesn't often evoke what could be termed resistant behaviour, because you aren't directly asking the client in front of you to do anything. You're just telling them about someone else, and whatever response the client in front of you gives, you can adapt into your approach and into what you say and do next. And even if the client does respond in a way that makes you decide that this induction isn't the right approach for them, you haven't asked them to do anything. You're talking about someone else, so you can wrap up telling them about this other client and move on to something else more suitable for the client in front of you. You never said to the client, this is a hypnotic induction.
How I normally do it is obviously say I was working with someone who wanted to know how to go into hypnosis, and so I told them that the first thing that happens when you go comfortably into hypnosis is that you start paying attention to the hypnotist, and while you're paying attention to the hypnotist, changes start happening inside you. So your shoulders perhaps start to relax a little bit, and your breathing starts to change, and there can be some movement, but at the same time a certain stillness can begin to set in. And so I explained to this person that often it's a bit like you start to go inside your mind. That's it. And your eyes close, and you just want to drift off, because you know it's such a pleasant feeling, such a relaxing feeling, and you just want to go with that feeling. That's it. That's it. And then 1, 2, 3, opening your eyes and come back to the room.
I was gone there. It was a long way away.
So I hope you found this presentation and demonstration helpful and interesting. I'm sure you may well want to revisit it a number of times to really get the most from this. Thank you for joining me. You can find my Hypnotherapy Revealed series of books in Kindle and paperback from Amazon and other book retailers, and find my free and affordable e-courses teaching about hypnosis, psychotherapy, meditation, parenting and autism over on my website, danjoneshypnosis.com. There's a link in the description where you can find the transcript for this presentation, which includes a list of all the cited works and a transcript of the demonstration with further details of what I'm doing during that demonstration. And if you found this interesting, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and if you know others who may find it helpful, feel free to share it with them.